There's a great podcast I'm listening to that I want to share with you before today's episode. It's called Reframables. Two very different sisters, one artist, entrepreneur, one teacher, philosopher, worked through some of their lives' biggest hurdles through conversations with artists, thinkers, and creators who are doing that kind of work in the world. This sister duo, Natalie and Rebecca Davey, aim to better themselves and the world they love through art, philosophy, humor, and lived experience. Their conversations with each other and their guests are vulnerable, honest, and wise. Every episode, they share bite-sized reframables for listeners to chew on for the rest of the week. At the end of this episode, I'll include the trailer to the show. You can find reframables wherever you listen to podcasts and at their website, seriesproductions.ca/reframables. Do you want to change the world? So do I. On this show, we meet artists whose work is doing just that. Welcome to Art Heals All Wounds. I'm your host, Pam Uzel. Have you ever felt disconnected from everyone and everything? You don't even want to be with yourself. How do you get out of this? Where do you even start? One way you might start is by creating a safe space with art. You pick up your colored pencils and you find yourself drawing women with eyes that are open and fierce and hair that spirals out into the universe and hides messages of encouragement and strength. You realize that you've repressed a lot of trauma, but the images of the women you're creating with your own hand assure you that it's okay to explore these hard experiences. You begin to feel braver, and you feel pleasure and joy in a way that you haven't in such a long time. The women you draw, with their eyes and their hair, whisper to you that you can take control of the narrative of your own life. What amazing things are you going to do now with your joy, your courage, and your agency? Claudia Marulanda is a New York City-based visual artist born in Cali, Colombia, and her passion is to empower women through the beauty of art. For most of her early adult life, she was a graphic designer working in the publishing industry. But after hitting an emotional rock bottom, as she describes it, Claudia rediscovered her passion for creating art. For Claudia, art was her medicine, which acted as a source of healing and a place for self-expression when she needed it most. Creating art became a way to relieve her pain and to release suppressed emotions. Most importantly, it became a source of empowerment. For this reason, Claudia facilitates art workshops to help women struggling with emotional distress heal one art piece at a time, transmuting their pain into empowerment. Her purpose, she says, is to remind women of their magnificence. Hi, Claudia. Thank you so much for being on this episode of Art Heals All Wounds. Can you introduce yourself by telling us who you are and what you do?
Sure. Well, thank you for allowing me to be here with you. My name is Claudia Marulanda, and I'm a visual artist, and I live in New York City.
Right. And I've seen a lot of your work online. I've seen it on your website. Your work is very beautiful, lots of beautiful portraits of women. And I'm curious, I would love to know your backstory. When did you get started doing art? Have you been drawing and painting since you were young? How did you get started?
The way I started was when I was a kid. I'm originally from Colombia, and my mom was in this country, and she sent me a Walt Disney coloring book, and I never forget that book. For some reason, I think it was 300 pages. I have no idea why. Maybe it was, but it was a big fat yellow book, and I colored everything there. Then I started drawing the illustrations from there. So I was always artistic. I then started like designing like clothes for my Barbies, but then life happened. I became a teenage mom, and then I did my best to finish school. And then I got into the graphic design world. I was working in the publishing industry. So it was a creative field, but I didn't do any art. Like I completely got away from it. There was like no drawing, no coloring, nothing. I was just like completely away from it. And then when I had a rough patch in my life, like a dark moment in my life, which I like to call it a place in my life that I hit an emotional rock bottom, that's what led me back to art.
Right, right. Well, you can go into as much or as little detail about the emotional rock bottom, but I am curious to know that step, sort of where you were, what you were feeling. When you say an emotional rock bottom, what did that mean for you? And then how did you get on this path to doing art? Because it's sort of that step of doing that I'm really curious about.
Sure. So what happened is that I was already in an unhealthy relationship with a man. And on my end, I had a lot of issues with myself. I had a very low self-esteem. I always felt very empty and kind of like
Mm.
disconnected from everything. I didn't know why, but that was kind of like the person I used to be. So being in this relationship, and when it finally came to an end, it got me into just feeling heartbroken. And well, it's
Mm.
not that funny, but the funny thing is that during that period, my son left home. He was in high school, a 17-year-old boy, and he left home to join the Marines. And a couple of months later, I lost my job. So at that point,
Oh, wow.
when I was a graphic designer, I had decided not to take a full time job because I didn't know what I wanted in my life. So I was a freelance art director. And when I lost this job, it just kind of like sent me down to the bottom. I was heartbroken. I felt abandoned. I was lost. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't want to do my job anymore. So I feel that the pain and the despair actually propelled me to go up. That's why I call it a rock bottom, because I was at such a low point emotionally that it actually led me to do something different. I was like, I can't live like this. I didn't want to be depressed. I didn't want to be miserable. So I decided to say yes to new things. And that was the best thing that could have happened to me because my life changed completely after that. I started doing self development work, looking into my spirituality, meditating. So I believe that part of embracing my solitude, because I found myself completely alone, that helped me go into art. Like one night, there was a hurricane here in New York, and I felt like I was getting depressed, but something told me to go and take out my pencils and paper. So I started drawing, and I realized that I felt kind of good. And then I started doing it more, and I liked it. I was like, there's something here. So I kept going with that. And the one thing that I wanted to say is that during this period, having the new experiences actually uncover a lot of things in my life. I realized why I always had low self esteem, and it was because of repressed emotions of past trauma.
Mm.
So I had to deal with that. That kind of like came up during that period too. And the beauty is that art really, really helped me. So when I was working, I would just come straight home because I was at work, I wanted to cry. I was feeling miserable. So I would just come home and start drawing. So I started drawing, I started coloring, then I started doing a little bit of painting, and it just kept growing. And the beauty of art is that, or the beauty of being in that space, that it just feels safe. it led me to want to grow more with it. Like if I felt like I didn't know how to paint, I wanted to start painting faces. And then instead of judging myself, I was like, you know what? Let me go and take a painting class. So it just started developing, and I just knew there was something with it, and I couldn't let it go. I have the first three big illustrations that I did. I have them up on my wall because I made a point to put them on my wall because I was like, this is the beginning of something new in my life. I didn't know what was going to happen out of it, but that's kind of what I started going with. And the more that I did art, the more that I wanted to learn about it. And I started doing my own research. I started talking to veterans, to people that have said that art saved their lives. I wanted to understand what did that mean.
Mm-hmm.
So the more I learned, I understood that art helped me. So I usually like to say that art was my medicine because it was kind of like the daily medicine that I was taking.
Right.
Because that's what I later, as I did my own research, I understood what art was doing, but it was what was keeping me away from being in distress, from feeling miserable. So it kind of kept me in that present moment and away from the pain. And then I started creating new things and desiring new things in my life.
Right. That's such a great point about it keeping you in the present moment. I mean, it's very different. A lot of us, when we're in pain, we maybe turn to something that's not very healthy in order to try to get away from that pain. But to have something like art that keeps you present, it somehow shifts the nature of what staying with that pain is in a way.
So one of the things that I did was, and this went through a couple of years, the learning about art. And after a while, I decided I was reading books relating to trauma. So I read The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, if I'm saying if I'm saying it right. And that book, it kind of like hit hard because I realized how trauma had affected my life. What I
Mm.
thought was my personality wasn't really my personality. It's the coping mechanisms that I had created, and I stayed with those for most of my life. I also read, I wish I have it here, Trauma and Expressive Arts Therapy by Kathy Malchiotti. So I began to like understand better, like how is it? Because I wanted to understand it's like how does art really help?
Mhm.
And one of the things is that it actually creates a safe space for us. It gives us that sense of safety. And that's what I know I needed that because I didn't feel safe with myself. Like I wasn't comfortable with myself. I didn't have a good relationship with myself. And that meant that I didn't have a good relationship with other people.
Mm.
Like people would say, oh, Claudia's shy, but there was more to my shyness. There was just me avoiding people, staying away, and because I was not comfortable with myself.
Mm.
So being in that space and feeling safe can start like going into higher levels. The other thing, and this is one of the things that she talks in the book, beginning to feel pleasure. When we start feeling pleasure, we start seeing things from a new perspective. We can create new narratives. So in my case, I was feeling pleasure, I was feeling good, and I was reflecting. That was the main thing. That's what I do in my workshops is help women get to that point where they can reflect. So as I was reflecting, I was kind of like getting okay with everything that had happened and then thinking of like what do I want to do later on. So one of the things that I did, well, that I do with my art is that I weave words into the hair of my art.
Yeah.
A lot of times those were like words of empowerment. Like the first one I did, it was a black and white, and it was just quotes, that I liked, and I just started taking from different places. But I needed something to let me know that there was hope, that there was something bigger and better later on. So I started adding those quotes, and being that I was present and thinking about those positive things actually helped me like start envisioning better things in my life. It started giving me some clarity, some
Mm.
desire of something else in my life. And that's basically how art helped me. And that's how I just kept evolving. And now it's my life. That's all I want to do.
Yeah, and I wanna talk talk about your workshops next. But before we go on, I hope people will instantly go to your Instagram or your website, because everyone who's listening really does need to see the hair on your portraits, because it is something, it's an element that isn't just hair. It really is, like you said, you put words in there. It looks like, sometimes I look at them and I feel like, oh, this almost feels like some sort of beautiful seaweed in the ocean, or you see like the beautiful long leaves of a willow tree or something. Like, the hair on your portraits is just amazing. It's one of my favorite things that you do. Although I also love the eyes of all your portraits too. But the hair is something like was the first thing that's just like, wow. So I wanted to ask you about this workshop you mentioned. What kind of workshops for women do you run? You talked about having them be able to reflect.
So last year, as I'm building my business, I'm figuring out what is the why. Why am I doing this? I realized that I wanted to do is help women, because that's how I got empowered through art. So I want to empower women. So I decided to start doing workshops to support women that have suffered trauma.
Mm.
But I kind of like wanted to start with that, but I was like, let me just open it up a little more just to women that are emotionally distressed. A lot of us have traumas, different type of traumas, and I didn't want to deal with that directly because I am not a therapist. I'm just an artist. So it's more about dealing with the stress and learning about our emotions, because the main thing that I got from art and being in that space, like embracing myself to creating art, it led me to gain awareness of myself. So as I was able to express myself and experience new things, I was getting to know myself, to understand who I was. Like when I understood how trauma affected me, then it's like, okay, there are things in my life that I need to start changing.
Mm.
And that's what I like to give women, like that space so they can just start getting a little bit of awareness. I feel the more we get to know ourselves, we can be empowered. We can make changes in our lives. We can make that decision and say, okay, I'm going to stop doing this and I'm going to start doing something new that's going to help me. So the workshop I started with, it was called Color with Intention. Now I color your way to feeling divine, because
Mm.
I want women to connect to their femininity. And that's what I did. So everything's based on my own experience. One thing that I learned is when a lot of women suffer trauma, depending on the type of trauma, they might be more in touch with their masculine energy to protect themselves. And as I was doing art, I was getting in touch with my feminine energy, which is the energy of creating, nurturing, taking care of myself. So I started learning to love myself, to appreciate myself. And that's what makes me want to do more art, because I feel like it's a love relationship when I'm creating art. And in the workshops, we talk about emotions. We use color and connect the color to emotions. The workshops lead to a program. So in the workshops, we do coloring. I give them prompts to reflect. We talk about what are emotions, what are suppressed emotions, how it affects the body when we suppress emotions, when we repress emotions, and how we can start releasing emotions so we can feel better and be healthier. And through that process, I give them prompts to color their hair, and then they reflect on emotions. And then let's say the emotion is like, I feel happy. And happy usually is associated with the color yellow. So then they'll use yellow to color the hair. So it's not like they choose the colors. According to their emotions, that's how they color the piece, which makes it interesting because you don't know what's going to come up. So you might end up using all these colors that you didn't even think you were going to use.
Right. So what's interesting to me is that when you're having them color parts of themselves, you're not really asking them draw the most realistic portrait of yourself. You really are asking for an internal portrait of themselves.
Yes, I feel that in this world that we're living in, we're too out of touch with ourselves. And I was oblivious of who I was, but I was also afraid to be with myself.
Mm.
And I believe that we need to start looking inward, because that's where we're going to find happiness. That's where we're going to find beauty and empowerment and the ability to love ourselves.
Mm.
So that's what I do. And then when I do the art program, that one I call it Uncover the Goddess Within, because I believe we're goddesses, future self portrait. So that one they need to create a portrait. That one, it's a 7 week program. We go through different mediums. Like last time, I loved the pastels because there's like a freedom. It's like letting loose using pastels. It's not colored pencils that is like a little more perfect. So I let them experiment, explore, because that's the whole idea: explore, experiment, and start envisioning like, what do you want for yourself? What new habits you might want to start making? How do you want to feel? Like one of my participants, she started working out.
Mm.
And it was because she realized that, it's healthy, it's good for her, and she needs to take care of herself for her kids. So she started working out, and she didn't tell me. Her husband told me. She's like, yeah, after that, she started going to the gym. And then I have another participant. She's actually a fitness trainer. She's moving. So during that period that we were doing that, she decided to move to Florida. So
Mhm.
she based it on the type of life that she wants to have in that new home in Florida, how she wants to feel.
Mm.
And I love the frame she got. It was just beautiful seeing how proud they were of what they created, and more importantly, what it meant to them. And to me, that's what happens with my art. Like when I have like a piece of art, I start staring it. Like every morning, I'll just go and stare at something I did, and just love like the reason why I did it, what came
Mm.
out, how this happened, how did the hair come out like this, and what it means to me. So I can see that they were feeling the same way, and it's something meaningful that they created on their own. And they're not artists, they're just, one of them, well, I know two for sure, they had not picked up colored pencils since they were kids,
Mm.
and they were able to create it on their own.
That's so fascinating, and man, I feel like I should do this workshop too because it sounds like maybe a step above a vision board in a way. It's the same idea, but there's something about this idea that you are drawing it yourself that sounds really powerful. Do you ever get anyone who's resistant to doing any of these exercises? I guess if they come to the class, they're looking for something, some sort of
Yes.
transformation, but I am just wondering if anyone ever resists these ideas.
I haven't felt it. Maybe in the workshops, since I started with like the free workshops, because I want women to know that they actually want to do this. They might just, like, I had someone that told me, oh, I don't like the psychological aspect of this.
Ah.
So I'm like, okay, but I think there's something to actually analyze when we have resistance. Maybe I should talk a little more to the person and see what the resistance is. I just want people that actually want to be there. And if they're ready, that's the most important thing. They got to be ready. They got to want to be better and start making changes in her life. Because if
Mm,
they're not ready, they're not going to enjoy it and get the benefits.
right, that is such a great point. I'm just curious, I've been looking through your social media and everything, and you'll either give yourself like, put a video of you in the process of drawing something or put, like, a finished piece there, and you'll also write some sort of affirmation in your post, but sometimes they're to yourself, and I'm just curious about that. Do you feel like this is just an ongoing process for you as you create art, that you're getting to know yourself better and better?
Definitely, definitely. Every step, even working with the ladies, I get to learn from them, and I get to see, how they say people, they're a reflection of who you are. So I get to see things within myself also. And for me, let's say I'm in this new journey. I'm building a business. I'm not where I want to be. I'm happy where I am because I'm growing, but there's always new levels and there's always fear. And one of the things about art is that it connects with my spirituality.
Mm.
Knowing who I am, connecting to that inner self, it's, to me, that's my spirituality. So I know what we speak, we're kind of like confirming, we're making that into a reality.
Mm.
And that's one of the things that I talk with the women, because we need to know what we're saying. We need to know that we're loving ourselves. Like if someone says like I'm dumb or stupid. Recently I did something like, I gave an example of like, if someone's bad in relationships and they say I'm a failure, it's not that you're a failure, it's that you fail at relationships because of whatever reason. So it's kind of like stepping away from that and saying, I made a mistake in this, not that I'm a failure. Because when we say I'm a failure, right away, like I just feel like icky. So affirmations to me are really important because that's what keeps me going. I have to remind myself there's more that I do. I have a daily gratitude practice. Those are the things that keep me going, keep me trusting and believing. It's a lot of work to keep moving forward, to doing the work, to want to work with women and help women. So I feel like I need to take care of myself and be in my best possible self so I can actually help other people. Because if I'm not, how can I help someone else?
Mm. That's so true. Well, Claudia, where can people find your work, learn more about you? Can you let us know?
Yes. So I haven't added my color with intention to my website, which is something that I want to add. But right now, the website to the workshops is called coloryourwaytofeelingdivine.com.
Ah,
And then if anyone wants to just look at my social media, everything's under my last name and art. So it's Marulanda Art. So I guess I'll spell it out. M as in Mary, ARULA, N as in Nancy, D as in David, then ART. So Marulanda Art. They can see me in social media, being a little more active on TikTok, because there's too many social media
I know,
platforms.
I know. But that's great. If it's consistent, they can just look anywhere and find.
Yeah, I try to stay on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. So at least, and I try to keep everything updated. And the workshops I'm going to be adding to my website, which everything's under Marulanda Art. So my
Okay.
website is marulandaart.com, but it all falls into that.
Okay. Well, that is great. I'm so glad that we met. And I've really enjoyed looking at your work online, and I'm going to continue to enjoy it. And, who knows, if you start doing online workshops, maybe I will take one too.
Thank you. I'm happy that I met you too. And thank you, because the work that you're doing is beautiful, bringing all this information to other people. So I appreciate that a lot.
Likewise, likewise. You're listening to Art Heals All Wounds. It was so great to hear about Claudia's journey from being at rock bottom and now teaching workshops for women to find empowerment. I always say that I can't draw to save my life, and talking to her made me realize that maybe drawing could save your life, my life, anyone's. If you were drawing a self-portrait based on your internal state, what would it look like? Remember to look for Claudia and her work on Instagram and TikTok at Marulanda Art, and on her website, marulandaart.com, for more about her work and to see her prints that she has for sale. I'm so glad to have you listening to this show. If you like the stories of these artists and their work, and you like the work I'm doing on this podcast, please follow it on whatever podcasting app you listen on. And sharing this podcast with a friend is a great idea. It helps us to grow. The music you've heard in this podcast is by Ketsa and Lobo Loco. This podcast was edited by Eva Hristova. This podcast is recorded in Oakland, California, on the unceded territory of the Chucheño Ohlone people.
Dear Reframables, welcome to our podcast.
I'm Nat.
And I'm Beck.
Two very different sisters who try to reorient life through the stories we tell.
We call it reframing.
Sometimes we do it through conversations, just the two of us.
And sometimes we bring in artists, thinkers, and creators to help us along.
Always, we like to leave you with some new reframable to chew on
as we work through life's big and small stuff together.